Hi, this is Shotgun Tom Kelly, and now that I have your attention, you wanted to be close to him in the dugout during his impressive 15-year Major League career because he was always watching, listening, and looking for an edge. Now, Kurt Bavacqua brings that edge to Dirty Kurt's Dugout, where you can listen, watch, and be a part of the most honest, informative baseball show available today. Now, here's Kurt.
All right. Hello there, everybody. How are you today? I know if you're a Padre fan, you're not too good, but besides that, everything's good. Padres have an off day. Thank goodness they won't lose a game. Yeah, I'll get on them a little bit because they deserve it, but everybody else is too, so I don't want to jump on the bandwagon. You know what I'm tired of hearing? I'm tired of hearing about Soto and Ohtani and Happ and Contreras. Give it a rest. Give it a rest, social media. You guys don't know squat. And don't listen to Bob Nightingale and all the rest of the writers out there, the Jeff Passons of the world. They talk to one executive. They'll go down on the field and talk to the GM of the New York Mets and say, well, what do you think? Who do you think's in line for getting Soto? And he'll say, oh, the Padres. That's it. Now all the executives are in a group saying, oh, the Padres are going to get Soto. Well, it's hogwash. It's hogwash. Now, will it happen? I'm not going to say it's not going to happen because this owner down here, he'll spend some money, but you can't give away the farm. I mean, with the players that they're talking about giving up for Juan Soto, I'm not doing it. I am not doing it unless he's contracted for 10 years. And I find out what kind of guy he is in the clubhouse. More on that in a minute. I see where our guest for the day, incidentally, welcome to Dirty Kurt's Dugout. This is Kurt Bavacqua, and I want to thank our continuing sponsorship, Hacienda Casablanca, Tony and Cindy out in El Cajon on 700 North Johnson. If you're in the mood for any kind of meal, especially Mexican, and also a good margarita, go see Tony and Cindy at Hacienda Casablanca and tell them that Kurt and producer Joe sent you. And of course, our good buddy down at La Cima Oil, who has our neighborhood Chevron stations, Tom Drake. We appreciate the support that you give us so we can in turn give out some nice prizes for our listeners. Mark Amore and Daniel Levitt got together and decided to write a book. I hope you guys are friends because I wouldn't want to spend as much time with one person to go and write a book. I saw this online on social media, and Mark will tell you. Hi, Mark, by the way. How are you, buddy? Thanks for coming on.
Hi, Kurt. I appreciate it.
Look, this book, Intentional Balk, it just jumped out at me because the first time I ever saw this happen, and Mark and I will get into this, was, I think, 2019. So I'm wondering if there's even mention of what Kenley Jansen did on the mound at Dodger Stadium one night when he intentionally balked. And we will get into that in a minute. But where did the idea come from to write this book about all the things that are going on in baseball, the unwritten rules, the thin line between cheating and innovation, we'll call it, like it says on your cover? Who came up with this idea?
Well, Dan and I, have known each other for years, and we've written other things together. And it was he that first had this idea of dealing with all the cheating scandals that have that have happened in baseball over the last, well, most of our lives, whether it's the spitball or steroids or sign stealing. And then, of course, there was Spider Tack just last year. And we just thought that it would be fun to sort of tie that together and write a whole, a whole history of these various things that have happened in baseball over the years, and how it is that baseball has dealt with them and how fans feel about it, and whether things might have changed over the years with each of these things. And we found out it was a pretty big story.
Well, it is a big story because every time there's made mention of it, you see it in the media. And I know there's way too much coverage of the game nowadays. I liked it a lot better when there was one or two beat writers for each team, not 15 people that are running around on the field that work for MLB.com or MLB Network and are trying to get this and trying to get that. But I just saw Max Scherzer today saying they shouldn't even think about having the communication between the pitcher and the catcher. They should go back to just giving out signs, because he thinks it's an intricate part of the game that shouldn't have been taken away.
Right. I saw that too. That was interesting. And one of the things that is interesting, you probably have, well, I'm sure you have a lot more insight than I do on this, but there have always been rules that teams will break, and a lot of them are rules that the players and even the umpires in some cases have sort of decided that, you know what, it's okay. People are stealing signs and it's okay, just let it be. And the same thing with the spitball for many years. A little bit of this, a little bit of that, it's okay. And then it kind of gets out of hand, and then there's a big crisis. But Scherzer basically says, my job is the catcher and I's job is to have a system that you can't figure out. That's what we want to do. And if you figure it out, then we need to be better at it. That's his attitude. And it kind of makes a lot of sense, because I'll tell you that when this came through a couple of years ago, or a few years ago, when the Astros thing first exploded, I was telling a few of my friends were asking me about it, since I'm the baseball guy, and they'd say, "What's going on?" And I would explain what actually happened. And the biggest reaction I got from non-fanatics was, are you telling me that in 2022 that's how people were sending signs between the pitcher and the catcher, by putting fingers between their legs? And I said, yep, they're still doing the same thing. So, Max has got a point.
Well, I mean, when we see somebody that we haven't seen from a distance, we still go like this. What's
right.
the difference? I mean,
right.
What are you going to call them on your phone? I mean, what the hell? I mean, I think people have gotten way too deep into, and we've got a commissioner that has surrounded himself with nerds that have, I'm not going to say they've ruined the game, but they're doing a damn good job at trying to. And they need to back off. I think somebody like Max Scherzer, when he comes out and says what he has, I think that's a good thing, because Max Scherzer's not an old school guy. Max Scherzer is an active major league pitcher that, sure, he's been around for 15, 18 years, but he's not what we would consider old school like me. So if Max Scherzer talks, people are going to listen and go, if that was me saying what Max said, they'd say, he's old school. But because it was Max, it's different. I'm interested in hearing your perspective on what you just talked about, where, players and teams and even umpires, if players are breaking the rules or bending them, that it's okay. What kind of rules are you actually talking about? Sign stealing?
Well, a perfect example of it is, and this is before my time and before your time, but we found stories written in the 1950s from umpires who were upset about what came to be known as the neighborhood play, where an infielder a middle infielder did not have to touch the base on a double play. I mean, you know a lot more about that than I do, but and over time, by the time I was growing up in the 70s, it was just everyone knew that this is what people did, right? The infielder didn't have to touch the base. Nobody got hurt. And then now with replay, of course, you have to touch the base again because you're not going to get away with that. So that is an example of the players and the umpires just sort of saying, like, it's okay. The throw beat them, right? If it's ridiculous, if you miss it by 10 feet, you're not going to get away with it. But if you get close enough, that's okay. And there certainly was a time with sign stealing where people were using binoculars from the stands. And for the most part, you would go, the team would go and protest to the league president or something, and he would just say, you know what, there's not really a rule against it. Other teams are doing it too, and it essentially was like, just don't make it too obvious. There were managers in the 1960s and 70s that would say about the spitball, a little wetness on your fingers is one thing, but if it's slobber all over it, then that's going too far. So there's this sort of notion that everyone sort of, and the umpires were in agreement on this. Nestor Shylock, a great old American League umpire, is in the Hall of Fame. He was quoted in the 1970s as saying, it's a little bit like a traffic cop. He just said, look, if I called every single infraction that I saw on the field, the game would never proceed and no one comes to the game to see me. Much like a cop cannot pull over everyone going 56 in a 55 mile an hour zone. There's a line. Everybody knows where the line is, hopefully. But you can see how even with the cop example I just said, this becomes dangerous if they're starting to pull over, certain kinds of people at 60 and other kinds of people. You're giving the cop the power to figure out where that line is. And that's certainly dangerous. Just like it's dangerous to, have umpires all of a sudden decide that, to call an infielder or to call a base runner safe because the middle infield didn't touch the base. I'm sure if that had happened to you in the 1970s, you would have been like, what do you mean you're calling the guy safe, because you've been calling it this way all along. And so that gets a little crazy.
Mark Moore is our guest, him and his buddy, Daniel Levitt. It is Levitt. I know that I like to pronounce people's names right. Or is it Levitt?
It's Levitt. You got it.
Levitt. Good. Daniel Levitt and Mark have co-authored Intentional Balk. And let's go back to Shylock for a minute because I disagree with something that you quoted him on it. Now, I did read that in the book, not with what you quoted him on, but what he said was that if he called every infraction during the course of a game, I think he's just patting himself and all the rest of the umpires on the back because Nestor was good at that. He was behind home plate for my first major league at bat. So Nestor and I, we go back. Yeah, we go back. It was in Fenway Park in Boston. And, I don't think there were that many infractions. I mean, you're certainly not going to call a guy at second base if you see him putting his hand on his right leg opposed to his left leg, trying to signal to the hitter that the ball's going to be inside opposed to outside. That to me has no place on anybody's tongue with stealing signs. That's part of the game. You're relaying information to your player, no more than the shortstop's relaying information to the outfielder that you should play a little bit over because the pitcher's going to throw this hitter an off-speed pitch, and he's a pull hitter. So, it's hogwash that people bring it up. I argue with people all the time. When I completely denounce it now. When I see it on social media, I just go to something else. I don't even get in on it. But I've seen these things over the years, and I think some of it is ridiculous. Naturally, the Houston thing, that was legitimate. When it comes to technology and relaying signs where you're using it and microphones and possibly earphones and all of that stuff on the cheating side, naturally, if a pitcher's using an earphone or a microphone where he can hear the catcher call the signs, or the little contraption that he's wearing, relay the signs to them, I think that's fine. I think it takes a little bit away from the game, like Max Scherzer said, but just the same, we used to try to steal signs all the time. I mean, there wasn't a game that went by that we weren't trying to steal signs. Did we think we were cheaters because of that? Hell no.
So what about? So let me ask you this, because I honestly don't know the answer. But were you involved with a team that used binoculars or telescopes or anything like that?
No.
Right.
No,
So I think
never.
right, and I think that's where, and again, this is my sense from talking to other players, is that's where the line was for them. Like if you use your eye, if you're using your eye on the field, you're on second base, or you're stealing signs either from the catcher, or even from the manager or base coach that is putting on a steal sign, then more power to you. But once the mechanical stuff gets in the way, that's when. And again, but there was no rule. It was just that's what everybody thought the line should be, and that's kind of what the commissioner ultimately ended up saying. Is it's the electronics of their problem.
Here's a way to put a stop to that real quick, and it's very simple. There was talk that the opposing team, and the Red Sox and the Yankees were included in this, that opposing team knew that these guys, along with the Astros, were stealing signs electronically somehow. The Houston Astros made it so obvious with the beating of the trash cans that it was ridiculous. But all it takes, one time, Mark, and all the people that are listening out there, if the catcher calls for breaking ball in a certain situation, and you got to pick the situation, because a lot of times these guys aren't relaying signs if there's nobody on base. If there's 2 outs in the inning and you're up by 5 runs, why are you going to relay signs? They don't want to make it that obvious. But all you have to do is call for breaking balls, make sure that the sign is relayed, that it's a breaking ball, and throw a fastball right at the guy's ribs. All it takes is that to happen one time. And the players that are at the plate aren't going to believe in the system anymore.
Right.
And that was done numerous times over the course of my career. If we saw guys relaying signs from second base, all they would do is make sure that the sign was a breaking ball, where the hitter's leaning out over the plate, and throw a fastball in. And it's over. They're not going to listen anymore.
Right. And I think a lot of players agree with that. Essentially, it's the idea that they can police the game themselves. We don't need help.
Oh, what happened to that? Police that. There's your next book. Why can't the players police the game themselves?
Yeah. Right.
I
don't know.
They would take advantage of it if they did. I realize there's some cops that are needed, but when it comes to sign stealing and things like that, one of the things I'm curious at, because I only got about halfway. I did pretty good, actually.
Thank you.
I only got about halfway. The title of this book is in direct correspondence with what Kenley Jansen did back in, I believe it was 2019. It could have been 2020, where there was a man on second. And of course, everybody's all hyper about it, about the runner stealing their signs. It was before the communication between the catcher and the pitcher were brought into baseball. And he looks back at the guy. He's wondering if he's stealing the signs, and he drops the ball. He's on the rubber, and he just drops the ball. Well, that's a balk. I mean, if he went like this to go into a stretch and the ball dropped out of his hand accidentally, but he did it on purpose. Is that in the book anywhere? Is that where you got the title from?
No, I actually wish that was how we got the title, because, we worked on the book a couple of years when this Jansen thing happened. And I love that story. I mean, and I don't think he's the first. He was the first guy that I'm aware of that did it, but I think it's happened since then. It's like,
oh yeah,
it's like you want to move the guy over, and that's the easiest way to do it, right? You just and that's not cheating. That's not cheating. That's fine, right? It maybe someday, like the intentional walk, the intentional walk, which has sort of gone away, that pitchers will stand on the mound and just sort of point to the runner and say, "Move to third." Like that's that. I don't want to go through the charade of dropping the ball. I don't know.
I don't know either. I think they ought to leave the game alone. I'm curious to see what they're going to do with it next year, rule wise, with the shift versus no shift, and the possibility of robo umps coming in, the possibility of larger bases. I think that stuff is coming. I mean, I really do. And in my mind, if you want to talk about cheating, that in effect is cheating the fans the way the game was supposed to play. I mean, I told this story, I believe it was last week on the show. So I want to tell you also that Darrell Chaney is a former teammate of mine, played with the Reds during the big Red Machine era, and also later on with the Atlanta Braves for quite a few years. And he sent me a picture of him playing center field at Candlestick Park in 1969, June of 1969. He was a shortstop. He was in center field because Sparky Anderson put 4 outfielders in the outfield at Candlestick, brought the third baseman and second baseman and first baseman on the right side of the infield. And I probably don't have to tell you who you think the hitter was.
Willie McCovey.
That's exactly right. And that's the way they used to shift against Willie McCovey every time he came to the plate.
Right.
Now, we never heard very much about it because there was no social media back then. All there was the game of the week, one time a week. It wasn't on TV every night. The Giants weren't seen throughout the Bay Area and across the land every single time they took the field. So I don't think it was that big of a deal. But I think with the movement of time and the technology that there is today and the advancement in radio and TV and everything else, I think that's the reason that people are calling for the different things that they're calling for. But, I found this, or I'm finding this book to be very, very light, and I'm enjoying the heck out of it. And I can't read. You know what? Oh, let me talk to you about this. I wasn't going to go that long on this show today, but it looks like I'm going to go an extra 5 minutes because I have to get this out. You talk about corking a bat, scuffing a baseball. I did not know. There is the picture that Darrell sent me. If you can see, Mark, he is. Where is he? I can't. Is he in center field or right center field?
He's in what we know as center field.
Okay.
Yeah, I see him.
He's in true center field.
And you can see Bobby Tolan is all the way to the right, down the right field line.
Yep.
Now, that's a shift, folks, for everybody that hasn't seen it yet.
And third baseman right up the middle. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a shift. But that's an actual game that Darrell had the picture of. But getting back to corking bats, the thing that I found truly amazing was that it's been going on for so many years, but the older players, and I'm talking about the pre-old school guys, I mean, the guys back in the 20s and 30s, they actually would drill a bat out and put lead in it to increase the weight. That's the craziest thing I ever heard.
Right. Well, as you know better than I mean, you want two things, right? You want bat speed, so you want the bat to be lighter, and then you want mass, so you want the bat to be heavier. And there's those, you have to figure out which one you want. So the idea of corking is to make the bat a little bit lighter so you can swing it faster and hopefully still get the same spring off the bat. That's the goal.
There actually is no spring. The compression of the baseball is the spring. I did a complete test on this thing in the late 80s for ABC TV, and it never got aired because of the earthquake in San Francisco. It was supposed to air that night of Game 3 when the earthquake took place, and it never did, and it got scrapped. So it's on a cutting room floor one day. I would love to be able to find it, but we went to professors at San Diego State University, University of San Diego. We talked to them about this. I corked bats. We did all kinds of testing on them. The use of a cork bat does nothing more than take out the weight, just like you said in your book, of somewhere between 1.5 ounces to 2.25 ounces, which is huge when you think about it. If you're able to get yourself a hold of a 34 or 35 inch bat that is pretty weighted and it's dense, and you bone it down, which also is something that's against the rules, which I think is crazy. But bat has to be one solid piece of wood. That's the rule in the rule book. I think that has to change because they're adding surfaces to bats now, and bats are made out of different wood now that are basically doing the same thing as what players tried to do when they call it cork the bat, and everybody thinks that the Super Bowls that we heard of with the Nettles incident and the cork that we heard of with Amos Otis admitting that he used the cork bat his entire career. What it did was it gave Amos, and I asked him to be on this show today and never got a call back from him. I shouldn't say I asked him. I called the Kansas City Royals front office and they got a message into him, but I guess it wasn't in time because Amos used to use a bat that was model U1. Now a U1, for those of you that don't know, is a bat that it doesn't have a knob on it. It has a handle that slims down as it comes from the barrel, and then it gets a little bigger as it goes towards the end of the bat, and then just evens out into just a solid piece of wood, but there's no barrel or there's no knob on it. That's the bat Amos used to use. Evidently, he was hollowing these things out, or somebody was for him, and he was putting cork. Now, what the cork does, Jeff Good just told me he's got a better contact for me than the Royals. Good, that's good to know, Jeff. I appreciate that because AO and I were teammates, and I didn't even know he used a cork bat. So if he used a cork bat his entire career, he was keeping it from the players too. But the thing about that is that when you're taking away 2 ounces from a 34 to 35 ounce bat, you're reducing it down to, say, 31 to 32 ounces, which is where 90% or more of the bats are today. If you go into a major league dugout, you're not going to see a bat that's as big as the ones that used to be in the dugout when I played. Because we had ash. We used to use ash all the time, both Louisville and Adirondack. They didn't have the birch and the maple that these guys are using, and the compression of the woods the way they're doing it. And then also, they coat the bats.
Right. And
I think that should be against the rules, but it's not. So it's okay with MLB. It's okay with me. I'm all right with it.
So what do you think the advantage is of having let's say a 32 ounce bat after it's been corked? Okay, so it used to be 34, now it's 32, as opposed to just having a 32 ounce bat from the manufacturer?
One thing. Well, if you get a 32 ounce bat from the manufacturer with 34 to 35 inch length, you're going to get a wood that's not as dense. So it's going to be very susceptible to breaking if you hit it on the end of the bat or towards the label. If you get a bat that's more evenly distributed weight-wise with the length, you're going to get a harder part of the tree. Right. Therefore, it's not going to break as easy. And then by taking the weight away, it gives you that corking it, and we're going to use that terminology for use of better terms. Corking it only gives you the advantage of being able to increase your swing speed going through the hitting zone. It's no different than the enlargement of drivers throughout the years on the PGA Tour. They are increasing the area that you can hit the ball, but decreasing the weight of the driver.
Right.
And in doing that, these guys are able to, I mean, you got Jasper Parnovic that weighs 150 pounds, hitting the ball 300 yards on the tee. I mean, where Jack Nicklaus and all the guys that played before him couldn't even come close to hitting the ball 300 yards with the Persimmons driver. But because of naturally, there's a little more spring to metal drivers and metal woods that they had back then. But I think it does one thing for the hitter, and I think it should be legalized. If a hitter wants to hollow out a bat, all he's doing is taking something away from himself. If he's not careful, you got to do it with the right size dowel, and you're able to decrease the swing, the actual weight of the bat, the way it comes from the manufacturer. But you got to use, I heard guys using an inch and a quarter dowels. I mean, you're taking that much of the bat away in the top when you're talking about an inch and a half. But if you're talking about 3/4 of an inch, you still got a pretty good thickness of the original bat before you get into an area that's hollow. And that's the reason they put the cork in it. If you put styrofoam in it, do you think people would care? Probably not. But the idea that it's cork gives you the idea that it's going to be a bounce to it, right, or super balls. You could put styrofoam in there. It's going to do the same thing. It's going to keep the bat from cracking down the middle, and that's what you wanted.
Right. So all you're trying to do is reduce the weight and get rid of the air pocket.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. Now, scuffing balls and all that, Gaylord, I was with the Cleveland Indians for a couple of years. Gaylord used to get a shipment of KY jelly every single year in spring training, and it would go in his locker. Everybody knew he was using it, but he would mess with the pitchers and the umpires' minds so much because he's going through all of this stuff. If you watch video of Gaylord when he pitched, he'll go through all of this stuff, and you see him sweating, and you can almost see it glistening on him. And they would call for the ball, and he'd throw it to him, and he didn't touch anything where he had the KY jelly. He was so good at that.
I tell you what, as a fan, I just love watching him. I just thought he was such an individual riot. I mean, the whole thing was a riot. He was the story from the moment he walked on the mound into the moment he left, all anybody could talk about. And that's what he wanted.
That's true.
Probably some of his best pitches were sliders and the guys waiting for the spitball.
He'd mess with their mind for sure. For sure. Well, Mark, I wish you a lot of luck with this book. Everybody, it's Intentional Balk, and you can buy it online. I bought it on Amazon, delivered to my house the next day. I was loving it.
Well, I really appreciate it, and it was a lot of fun to write, and I think there's a lot of fun stories in there. Some people will remember. Some of them are funny. Some of them are more serious, depending on how you feel about cheating. But all the Gaylord stuff, of course, is just hilarious. But and I'd be willing to talk to you about anything, anytime, Kurt.
I appreciate that, Mark. Thank you very much, and say hello to Daniel for me.
I will. You have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So enough about cheating, if you want to call trying to steal signs from the catcher and relay it to your hitter when you're on second base cheating. If that's the way you feel, you and I look at things two different ways. But that's okay. We can always talk about it. But don't even try to convince me that it's cheating, because it's just not. That's all there is to it. How about Ralph Houck? You remember Ralph Houck? Ralph Houck signs that he relayed from the dugout to his third base coach to in turn relay to the hitter were so simple that if you watched him for a couple of games, you'd pick him up. Because naturally, signs that are relayed from the manager to the third base coach and then in turn relayed to the hitter are situational. You're not going to relay a hit and run play if there's nobody on base. You're not going to relay a hit and run play if there's 2 strikes on the hitter, unless you're crazy. And most of the time, you're not going to hit and run when you're 6, 7 runs up. So hit and runs are not going to happen unless the situation calls for a hit and run. The pitch count calls for a hit and run. And then you start watching what the manager's doing and what the third base coach is in turn doing, and also how the hitter reacts to getting a sign. Does he get a sign from the third base coach and turn around and stop looking at him before he even finishes? Or does he continue to watch and then get in the batter's box to see if the third base coach takes the sign off that he just put on? These are the little things about the game that can't be taken away, that most of you folks don't even know about. Because I bet a lot of you didn't even realize that you can put a sign on, but then take it off. Or if I go to my hat, there's nothing. Anything that involves the hat, it's nothing. I can go through all of my signs: bunt, take, hit and run, steal. But if I touch the hat first, there's no sign. This is the kind of stuff that used to be intriguing to try to figure out if you were an opposing player and naturally were on the bench. I mean, you couldn't do this stuff if you were in the field. Concentrate on the manager and the third base coach and what they're relaying to the runner. So enough of that stuff for now. Now let's talk about something really serious. The Major League standings and the Padres and where they stand. 3 weeks ago, the San Francisco Giants were 3.5 games out of first place, and the Padres were like a game and a half out. And granted, the Dodgers have been playing great baseball, but these guys are 11.5 and 17.5 games out of first place now. Basically playing for a wild card. As it stands right now, both the Padres and the Giants are not playing for the National League West anymore. They're playing for the wild card. If they start creeping up and things turn around for the Dodgers the way they did for the Padres and the Giants in the last few weeks, maybe that conversation can happen again. But for right now, they're scraping. They're scraping for their life to get into the postseason. It has been ugly. There's even talk that the Padres are going to take the ball away from Taylor Rogers, their closer, who incidentally leads the major leagues with 28 saves. But you know what, folks? His last 2 appearances have resulted in blown opportunities. What? There's nothing different to the Taylor Rogers that was with the Twins before. He blew save opportunities. It's not like this guy had a 1.9 ERA. His ERA has been up there maybe not as high as it is now. This guy is still and can still be a save-producing pitcher. Let me tell you what has to change. Pitch sequence. I know you hear me say that a lot, but I don't blame Taylor Rogers here. Trust me. Because we talked about just a few minutes ago about the catcher relaying signs to the pitcher, or that little machine relaying signs to the pitcher. That's coming from a computer. I'm sorry, but when the count's 1-2 on Miguel Cabrera, the pitch that you call is going to be different than if you're 1-2 on Cody Bellinger. It's not one size fits all, guys. I don't care if your best pitch is your slider. If you're facing a certain guy in the lineup that's susceptible to high or inside fastballs, 0-2 and 1-2, and he's looking for breaking balls out over the plate, because guess what? That's why he's susceptible to inside fastballs or high fastballs, and you still throwing breaking balls, you're an idiot. That's all there is to it. Bang. You're stupid. And I'll sit across the table and I'll tell anybody that tells me that if his best pitch is his slider, he's got to go with it, I'm going to have an argument with him. Shame. The way the Padres have been playing. But I'll tell you who else has lost ground over in the National League East has been the Philadelphia Phillies. Boy, the Braves are hanging in there. If you look at the standings here, the Atlanta Braves are just 2.5 games in back of the Mets. I mean, that's a race, folks. The Central, are these today's, Joe? These don't look.
Yes.
Really?
Well, it came from ESPN today, so I'd have to assume so.
Let me see what I was looking at earlier. No, I got Atlanta 3 games back. Oh, maybe they've played already.
That's what I was thinking, yeah.
Maybe Atlanta's played. Okay, that's my bad. But they should have. I'm on MLB.com, the app, and wait a minute. There's something wrong here. I got St. Louis 3 games out. So I don't know who's right or who's wrong, but we're just talking about a couple of games as far as those guys are concerned. The guys that I'm really talking about are the guys that fell off the face of the earth since the last time we talked. And that's Atlanta is 3 back, Joe. So I don't know what's let's see what we got here. 59-41. And you've got this is not right. 56-38.
Well, I pulled those numbers right before we went on, so a game must have wrapped up because I just looked at it.
No, this is like 4 or 5 games ago. So, but that's all right.
Okay.
That's all right. See where you got San Francisco is 12.5 out down here. They're 17.5 out today.
Send the hate mail to ESPN.com.
Well, they suck.
Yeah.
We just proved that. Okay. So basically what I'm trying to say is there's not too many races going on anymore, at least in the National League West, for sure. The only thing they're racing against is the wild card berth, which is right here. And the Atlanta Braves got it up on the Padres 4 games. The Padres are 2 games up on the Philadelphia Phillies. and St. Louis Cardinals, but one of those teams is going to get in also. And the San Francisco Giants aren't very far behind. And believe it or not, the Miami Marlins are only 6 games out, which it really doesn't surprise me because the Marlins have one heck of a young ball club, in my estimation. They really do. Hey, I want to thank all of you that tuned in today. I appreciate the comments. Jeff, I'll look for that private message on Enos Cabell because I'd love to have him on the show one day and follow up with our conversation about corking bats. I know it's something that you folks can't really get a grasp of, wrap your arms around. How can you change the baseball bat? And the rule in the rule book of baseball, and it hasn't been changed for 120 years, is that the bat needs to be made of one solid piece of wood. You know, when we got bats back in the day, very few of them were game bats. I'll put it that way. And I'm going to leave you hanging on that because we're going to continue this discussion so that I can get my point across, because I have so many people ask me about this because they're looking at the bats of today where they're all nice and polished. And when I say polished, they have a coating on them with some type of finish where you could hardly see the grain in these bats. That wasn't the way it was back 20 years ago, 30 years ago. The grain was very prevalent in a bat. And I'm going to have a couple of bats ready to show you the next show, which is going to be next week, Thursday at 3:15. I appreciate Joe, my producer, Joe, and all of you for tuning in. Naturally, another thank you to Cindy and Tony out at Hacienda Casablanca, our good friends at one of the best Mexican restaurants I've ever eaten at, 700 North Johnson in El Cajon, and also Tom Drake. Thank you for our gift cards at your Chevron stations around San Diego. Of course, Tom, owner of Lacima Oil. We thank him. So until next week, this is Kurt Bavacqua saying thank you for tuning in. Hope your home team wins or the team that you root for wins. And we will see you next week. Same time, same station. Until then, goodbye, everybody.